I was 16 when it happened, in my junior year of high school. I remember because the school year had just begun, and I'd been assigned to an astronomy class I hadn't even signed up for. It was in one of two classrooms down in the basement, a weird little section of the school everyone jokingly called the chamber. The chamber used to be storage for janitors, a place for mops, buckets, and bleach. Years later, they cleaned it up, threw in white tiles, painted the walls the same shade of eggshell as the rest of the building, and called it classrooms. But it never lost that damp, echoing quality, and even when all the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, you still felt like the walls were leaning in on you. No one liked going down there alone. It wasn't haunted, or at least that's not what people said, but the absence of intercom speakers made it feel disconnected from the rest of the school. We never heard morning announcements or fire drills down there, and it gave the basement its own strange bubble. People loved it because it had air conditioning and its own bathroom, but even then teachers warned us not to hang around after class. The day it happened started out completely ordinary. 9 periods, like always, lunch during 5th astronomy right after. I was one of the first to finish the quiz that day. I always was. It wasn't a hard subject for me. I texted my friend JJ, who had the other basement classroom, to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. He slipped out a few minutes later, and we just hung around talking, laughing, messing with our phones. That's when JJ's phone buzzed with a text. "Dude, lockdown," he said, frowning at the screen. At first we grinned. Lockdowns always felt like free time if you weren't trapped in your class. Nobody had seen us leave, and technically, we couldn't have heard the intercom from the chamber anyway. We were invisible. Free. But when we pushed open the door to the main hallway, everything changed. The first thing we noticed was the lights. They were off. Completely. Usually during lockdowns, the lights stayed on, doors locked, students stayed quiet. But now the entire corridor stretched into darkness, only faintly illuminated by pale daylight leaking in from the lobby doors at the far end. The floor glistened like black glass. This doesn't feel right," JJ whispered. I wanted to agree, but I didn't want to sound scared. So I said, "Let's just look around." Worst case, we explained we didn't hear the announcements. That's when JJ froze. "Who's that?" I followed his gaze. At first, it just looked like a shadow moving in the dark. But then a figure emerged. Slow, shambling steps, a body that seemed too relaxed, too out of place. The man wasn't dressed like any teacher or staff member. His clothes looked grimy, oversized, like he'd been living on the streets. His face stayed in shadow. Panic surged through me. "Let's go," I hissed, yanking JJ's sleeve. We darted back into the basement and ducked into the bathroom. I slammed the light off, and instantly the room was swallowed in blackness. We crouched in the far stall, the silence broken only by our breathing and the occasional drip of water from the sink. Then came the sound of the bathroom door creaking open. A thin shaft of light spilled in from the hallway, and then the door shut again. Whoever it was inside with us. The footsteps started, slow and deliberate. Leather or rubber soles on tile. They came closer, stopped. The air shifted with a ragged breath, heavy, wet, almost wheezing, as if whoever it was had run a long way to get here. JJ's hand clamped down on my arm, trembling. Then he leaned to whisper in my ear, "We should crawl to the next stall. Get out the other side." But the bathroom was so silent that even his whisper sounded thunderous, bouncing off the walls. The breathing outside our stall stopped, and then the handle rattled. Hard. The man pressed against the stall door once, then again, then harder. The metal groaned, hinges squeaking. Then the banging started. Loud, violent, like he wanted to rip the door off its frame. "Go," I hissed, shoving JJ. We dropped to the floor and crawled under the partition to the next stall, then the next, scraping our knees against the cold tile. Behind us, the banging grew louder, metal slamming against metal in a deafening rhythm. Finally, we burst out the far end, the fluorescent light from the hallway spilling in as I shoved open the door. And there he was, the man, standing in the corner of the bathroom, his head tilted, watching. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflecting it back like an animal's. We didn't stop. We ran straight to JJ's classroom and pounded on the door until the teacher cracked it open and yanked us inside. JJ stammered everything that happened, pointing at the window. The teacher's face went pale, his hand locking the door. "He's got a gun," the teacher muttered. Staring at the man outside, I hadn't seen it, but the teacher swore he saw the black glint of metal tucked into the man's waistband. The rest of the class huddled against the walls, wide-eyed, whispering prayers. The man pressed his face to the door's little window, grinning, tapping the glass with his knuckle. Then he rattled the handle, pounded his fist once, twice, before finally wandering back down the hallway, disappearing into the dark. We sat in silence for over an hour, waiting. Every little creak made us flinch. When the all-clear came, we filed out single file into the sunlight where police cars and flashing lights flooded the parking lot. Officers swarmed, taking statements. Me and JJ described him as best we could. The cops nodded, wrote it down, but their faces told me something. This wasn't the first time they'd heard about him. The man was never caught. No news outlets reported it, no follow-up emails from the school. But after that day, cameras appeared on every hallway corner. New security guards checked doors, and the basement suddenly didn't seem so easy to sneak out of anymore. Even now, years later, I can still feel the cold tile under my palms as we crawled, can still hear the stall door shaking under fists, and can still see that face in the corner of the bathroom, waiting. I know in my gut what his intentions were. He didn't want money. He didn't want to scare us. He wanted us dead. I spent 20 years as a police officer in New Jersey, and in those 2 decades I saw things I'll never forget. Bloody car accidents, home invasions, domestic calls that turned into tragedies. But the worst call I ever answered, the one that still wakes me up some nights drenched in sweat, came on a stormy weekday afternoon. The radio call came in around 2:40 p.m. A middle school, name withheld for legal reasons, was on lockdown. A man had been seen stepping out of a white van parked behind the building and slipping through a back door near the boys' locker room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Schools went on lockdown for all sorts of reasons. Threatening phone calls, suspicious backpacks, rumors. 90% of them turned out to be false alarms, but the dispatcher's voice had that edge of urgency that told me this was different. By the time I pulled into the back lot, the sky had opened up. Rain slammed against my windshield in fat, heavy drops, the kind that blur everything into gray. I parked next to the van. It was plain white, unmarked, every door locked. I circled it with my flashlight, shining the beam through the tinted glass. Empty. Too empty. The air inside looked stale, like no one had been in it for hours, but something about it set my teeth on edge. I should have gotten the plate number first thing. That mistake will haunt me forever. The red back door to the school was ajar, swaying slightly in the storm. I unholstered my flashlight, stepped inside, and was swallowed by darkness. The hallway was long, stretching into shadows. The power was on, but the main lights had been switched off. The only sound was the storm battering the roof above. The front office secretary appeared from around a corner, whispering, pale as paper. She said a man had been spotted near the locker rooms, possibly armed. She begged me to check. I called for backup over the radio, and they assured me units were already en route. But in a lockdown, seconds mattered. Kids were huddled in classrooms, teachers trembling behind locked doors, all waiting for someone to keep the threat away. I made my way down the gym hallway, boots echoing on the tiles. The boys' locker room door was just ahead. I pushed it open slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through total darkness. The smell of sweat and mildew hit me instantly. There were no windows, no emergency lights, just row after row of metal lockers looming like soldiers. The white noise of a ceiling vent hummed above, but beneath it came another sound, a faint scratching, a soft metallic ding, like someone's fingernails dragging across locker doors. I froze. I should have announced myself as police, but my voice caught in my throat. The tension in the room pressed down on me like lead. Every step I took, the noise seemed to move, always just beyond the reach of my light. I approached the bathroom door inside the locker room. Suddenly, a deafening slam echoed from the far side, a locker door crashing shut. I nearly fired my weapon out of instinct. The sound had come from the adjoining football team locker room. Those lockers were 3 times the size, enough to fit a small person inside. I crept toward the doorway, my flashlight jittering in my hand. My breath fogged in the beam. Police! I finally barked, voice cracking. Come out now. For a second, nothing. Then a muffled voice screamed, "Help, please!" It was a boy's voice, young, panicked. I followed the sound to a row of lockers. My heart lurched as a pounding rattled one of the doors. "Inside, someone was trapped. I'm right here," I shouted. "Hang on!" I tugged at the handle, but it was locked tight. I told the boy I'd be back, that he was safe now. My radio crackled as I called for backup again. urgency in my voice. I sprinted out to the lot to grab the van's plate, because somehow I knew the two were connected, but the van was gone. The empty space where it had been shimmered with rainwater. My stomach plummeted. I ran back inside, heart hammering, and ordered the staff to send someone with a master key. Teachers scrambled through hallways, whispering into walkie-talkies. The whole building seemed to shake with fear. When we finally got the boy out, his face was streaked with tears and blood. A shallow cut along his arm oozed red. He told us a man had cornered him near the showers, pressed a knife to his back, and forced him into the locker. He'd been whispering threats in the dark, telling the boy to stay quiet or he'd slit his throat. The kid fought back, earning the slice on his arm, but eventually got shoved in and locked up. The man's plan, I realized, had been simple. Trap the boy, sneak him out to the van once the coast was clear. Disappear. We were lucky. Luckier than we deserved. A week later, the van turned up in a 7-Eleven parking lot. The driver matched the boy's description. A wiry man in his 40s with hollow eyes and yellowed teeth. They arrested him on the spot. He had rope, duct tape, and a hunting knife tucked under the seat. But I'll never forget the way the boy's voice sounded, muffled and desperate through that locker door. Or the way my flashlight beam seemed to always miss the shadow moving just out of reach. Even now, retired, I think about that van, about how easily he slipped out while I was only feet away, and I think about how many other times he might have been successful before anyone called the cops, because the boy wasn't his first, and I don't believe for a second he was his last. I was 19 when it happened, still trying to figure out what to do with my life. I'd been touring colleges with the hope that something, anything, would click. Rowan University was the school I had my eye on, so I booked a room at a nearby Hampton Inn for a couple nights. My parents couldn't make the trip, so I was on my own. The first day went smoothly. I walked the campus, sat through a guided tour, even grabbed dinner at a local diner. By the time I returned to my hotel room, it was just after 8. The sky outside was purple and heavy with summer heat, and the air in the lobby smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, swiped my key card, and flopped onto the bed with a sigh. The room was average. 2 queen beds, beige wallpaper, the faint buzz of an old air conditioner. I planned on showering, throwing on some TV, then passing out early. I had another full day of tours the next morning. That's when the alarm went off. At first it was just a shrill beeping like a smoke detector on steroids. Then a white strobe light began to flash from the corner of the ceiling. A robotic voice crackled through hidden speakers. "Attention Hampton Inn guests, please remain in your rooms. This is a lockdown." I sat up in bed, confused. A lockdown? I'd never even heard of a hotel doing that. Fire drills, sure. Evacuations, yes. But lockdown? I waited for more information, but the message only repeated every 20 seconds. The alarm eventually stopped, but the flashing light and recorded warning didn't. At first, I wasn't scared. Honestly, I thought it was interesting, even exciting. Like I was in the middle of some secret protocol I wasn't supposed to know about. I paced the room, peeked out the window toward the parking lot, watched the storm clouds gathering over the interstate. An hour passed. The light still flashed. The message still played. My excitement had turned to annoyance. I brushed my teeth, changed into sweatpants, and tried to watch TV with the sound turned up. The hotel cable offered nothing but reruns. I killed the lights and crawled under the blankets, determined to sleep despite the strobe. But just as I was starting to drift off, the phone rang. The landline, the kind that sat on the nightstand beside the bed. I picked up, expecting the front desk to finally explain what was going on. Instead, a woman's voice whispered urgently, "Sir, you need to stay calm. Walk out of your room, right now." Her tone made my chest tighten. "Wait, what's going on?" I asked. "Is this about the alarm?" Her voice cracked. "There's somebody in the room with you, get out." I dropped the receiver, my pulse thundering in my ears. Instinctively, I looked around the room. Empty. Bathroom door open, lights off. Bedside shadows still. I grabbed the edge of the blanket like a shield, listening. Then I saw it, the closet. It was one of those shallow wooden closets with sliding doors. The left door was open just a crack, no more than an inch. Through that narrow gap, I saw a face. At first, my brain didn't register it, just a pale oval unmoving. But then I saw the glint of an eye staring straight at me. The door slid shut. Every nerve in my body screamed. I bolted, fumbling with the lock, yanking the door open, sprinting down the hallway barefoot. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would rupture. The front desk staff were waiting in the lobby, faces grim. They showed me security footage from an hour earlier. A man in a dark hoodie, short and stocky, had been wandering the halls. He stopped, at my door, glanced around and slid a card key from his pocket. He let himself in, and then he never came out. I swear my blood turned to ice. Police stormed the room minutes later. When they dragged him out, cuffs biting into his wrists, I saw his face up close. Mid-40s. Greasy hair. Smiling. He looked at me like he knew me, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Later I learned he'd been arrested before. Trespassing, stalking, even breaking into homes. How he'd gotten a master key card was still under investigation. But what haunted me most wasn't that he'd been hiding in my closet. It was the realization that he'd been there the whole time. While I showered, while I changed, while I brushed my teeth. Watching, silent, waiting. The flashing light from the lockdown alarm still burned behind my eyelids whenever I closed them for weeks afterward. The robotic voice still echoed in my ears. But worst of all, I still remember the way his eye looked through that crack in the door. Fixed on me, like he'd already chosen me. And some nights when I wake in the dark, I swear I see that sliver of light in the corner of my own room. A door cracked open, a face watching, waiting again.